So you found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey there, YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here. Last time we covered 11 so-called quick facts from ICR, and today we're going to do 11 more. As a reminder, the whole video used music extensively, and I had to do some pretty heavy editing to get rid of most of it to avoid copyright problems. As a result, the audio is not very good. I hope that's okay. We're starting off with the Jurassic omelet, our 30-second topic overall.
So which came first, the chicken or the egg?
The egg, the amniotic egg, evolved before the Permian, whereas a chicken is a domesticated bird that originates as such in the Holocene.
The chicken, of course. If you don't have a chicken, you can forget about that omelet.
In fact, you can make an omelet out of just about any bird egg. People eat ostrich eggs, quail eggs, etc.
Did you know that it takes 24 hours for a hen to produce an egg?
Kind of. If you have a flock of chickens that are at peak egg laying, you'll get about as many eggs each day as you have hens, but young or old hens will produce less, and even at peak production, you'll usually get a bit fewer eggs than you have hens per day. So yeah, on average, at the peak of her egg-laying rate, a chicken hen will produce about an egg every day.
What's more amazing is that she only needs a 30-minute break before she starts again. What makes eggs white or brown? Feathers. That's right. Hens with white feathers and earlobes make white eggs, and hens with red or brown feathers and earlobes make brown eggs.
No, it's not because of the feather color. Rather, they're both controlled by the same thing. That is, the genes controlling the production of melanin. If it were controlled by the feathers themselves, you could dye eggs by dyeing the feathers. So if you took a white hen and dyed her feathers blue, you get blue eggs. But you don't. You still get white eggs.
And each egg has as many as 17,000 tiny pores around its surface.
Welp, that's big numbers, therefore God.
But what about eggs from other creatures? Eggs come in many sizes, shapes, and colors. From quail eggs, to robin eggs, to chicken eggs, to enormous ostrich eggs.
Man, who would have thought that birds that differ in things like size, proportion, and color might have eggs that would likewise differ in size, proportion, and color? You know, besides everyone.
And then there are dinosaur eggs.
All the eggs so far have been dinosaur eggs.
That's right. From time to time, paleontologists uncover fossilized dinosaur eggs that were destroyed before hatching. Recently, a study was conducted on fossilized sauropod eggs in the Yunnan province of China. The eggs contain the tiny bones of the unborn dinosaurs, which, according to scientists, fell victim to cataclysmic flooding. And within the bones, scientists have identified the remnants of proteins that could only have existed for thousands of years, not 190 million years, as some suggest.
Yes, those proteins almost certainly can't survive millions of years. That's why what was found was remnants, as our narrator said. Think of an iron sword that you might find in an old tomb of a warrior. Chances are it's mostly going to be rusted away, because an iron sword can't last much more than thousands of years. But what about that rust pile left behind that shows that the rest of the sword existed at one point? Well, that can last indefinitely, because once iron turns to rust, nothing more is likely to happen to it. It's the same with these protein remnants. Once they decay into stable remnants, that's it. They're likely to stay that way indefinitely.
And these facts support the idea of a global catastrophic flood, like in the time of Noah, occurring just thousands of years ago.
No, nothing about protein remnants or the fact that some fossils are found in flood deposits indicates a global flood or young age of the Earth. In fact, in admitting that paleontologists can recognize flood deposits when they see them, and that they in fact do not identify most fossil-bearing deposits as such, is indirect evidence against the global flood being the cause of the fossil record. Okay, our second topic of the day, and 33rd overall, is missing in action, and I have no idea what that means in this context.
The missing link, commonly thought of as a hypothetical ape-like creature.
You know, hypothetical except for the Australopithecus species, Afarensis, Anamensis, Africanus, Barrel-Ghazali, Diarmida, Garhi, Prometheus, and Sediba, Kenanthropus platyops, Sahelanthropus chidensis, Aurorantuganensis, and the Homo species, Antecessor erectus, Ergaster habilis, Heidelbergensis, Longi, Lucenensis, Naledi, Rhodesiensis, and Rudolfensis. You know, come to think of it, that doesn't seem all that hypothetical.
This evolutionary rock star is supposed to bridge the gap between man and ape, but there are missing links all over Darwin's evolutionary tree. And guess what? They are still missing.
I think we all know what time it is.
For instance, dogs and bears are thought to be cousins, related to each other through a missing link.
Allow me to introduce Amphision, a morphological intermediate between canids and ursids. It's even called a bear dog. Yay!
The same could be said for every other gap in evolution. And some of these gaps are huge, like the gap between sea creatures with and without bones.
Hey look, it's a hagfish, which despite being a vertebrate, has literally no bones. That was easy. You'd think that if there were so many gaps, I wouldn't be able to show what goes in each and every one so far.
While scientists have found fish fossils with bones and ones without, they have yet to find what goes in between.
Placoderms. They have partially ossified skeletons. They're literally fish transitioning from cartilage skeletons to a bone skeleton. Like, this isn't even hard.
All types of animals are thought by evolutionists to have risen by the transformation of some other animal type.
I'm not sure what some other animal type means. I suspect it's just a weasel word so that any actual intermediaries can be dismissed. But maybe I'm wrong about that.
And as each part of the evolutionary tree branches from one type to another, there appears to be another missing link. And that's the big problem with evolution.
A far more logical explanation is the undisprovable science of creaturism. All life was created in its present form 7,000 years ago by a fantastical creature from outer space.
Bunk!
Oh? If your elitist East Coast evolution is real, why has no one found the missing link between modern humans and ancient apes?
We did find it. It's called Homo erectus.
Then you have proven my case, sir. For no one has found the link between apes and this Homo erectus.
Yes, they have. It's called Homo habilis.
Aha! But no one has found the missing link between ape and the so-called Homo habilis.
Yes, they have. It's called Australopithecus africanus.
Oh, I've got you now. Fair enough. But where, then, is the missing link between apes and this Darwinius macilli? Answer me that, Professor.
Oh, okay, granted that one missing link is still missing. But just because we haven't found it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Pshaw! Things don't exist simply because you believe in them. Thus saith the almighty creature in the sky!
For every single transition between every single speciation event to be present as a fossil would require literally every species to be preserved in the fossil record. No one thinks that's the case. I mean, just look at the animals that creationists think are related by common descent. What's the ape species that's the common ancestor of orangutans and gorillas? We don't have it. Heck, we don't even have the common ancestor of the gorilla species. Yet creationists think they're related. No one thinks that the fossil record contains every single species, and also, we don't currently know about every species that are preserved as fossils, as evidenced by the fact that new paleotaxa are described routinely.
Evolution depends on countless missing links, each of which lived in a past we can never know.
If we can't know it, then it doesn't matter if we have the fossils. They still wouldn't tell us anything if the past is unknowable. But the fact is that creationists do accept the fossils are the remains of dead organisms, many of them now extinct, which means that they do not, in fact, think the past is unknowable. They only say that when the things that we find about the past are inconvenient to their pre-selected conclusions. It's just pseudoscience.
And they all have supposedly gone extinct, replaced by their evolved descendants.
Nope, there are living transitional forms right now. We already saw the hagfish, but here are the pipefish and the sea dragon, both transitional between Bacillus ignathiform fish and seahorses.
For example, if some types of fish evolved into some types of amphibians, then there should have been a few changed along the way from 90% fish, then 80% fish, and so on until 100% amphibian emerged.
Eusthenopteron, Pendrichthes, Tiktaalik, Elginarpeton, Ventostega, Acanthostega, Ichthyostega, Tulerpeton, Perderpes, and Cassarina. Wow, that was easy.
But the evidence and the fish are still missing.
It's like they're not even paying attention to my responses. How rude.
Creation says that all life was created after its kind. We can easily see that creation has upheld that process to this day.
Okay, everyone say it with me. What's a kind?
Evolution says we have to trust that there are many unseen missing links out there.
Now, we have transitional species for basically every major transition in the history of life.
So it's plain to see that the theory of evolution is a theory full of gaps. What do you find more believable?
The one with actual physical evidence. Evolution. Okay, now we come to our third topic of the day, which is also our 34th topic overall, whale evolution.
In 1859, Darwin speculated that bears evolved into whales. But does this story hold water?
No, it doesn't, because he didn't speculate that. ICR is just lying. Darwin speculated that a creature such as a bear could become as large as a whale given enough time and the habit of filtering food from water. It was a speculation about a possible future, not about the actual past of whales. He also removed the speculation from later editions of The Origin of Species, after it was in the first edition. If you don't believe me, feel free to go check the first edition. It's public domain and available online.
Secular scientists.
Let me stop you there. There's no such thing as secular scientists. There are scientists that follow the methods of science, including methodological naturalism, and then there are those who don't, who are pseudoscientists. Scientists can be of any or no religion, as can pseudoscientists broadly, although some kinds of pseudoscience come with religious obligations.
Secular scientists support Darwin's hunch with two main arguments. One, fossils, and two, useless features, also known as vestigial features.
First, no one is trying to support the idea that whales evolved from bears, and second, no, vestigial features are not necessarily useless. They are just no longer used for the primary purpose that they are used for in related animals. For example, the wings of ostriches do not allow them to fly, so they are vestigial, even though they do let them keep their balance while running, and allow them to perform mating displays. They remain vestigial despite having important functions. Third, there are also genetic studies that show that hippos are the closest relatives of whales, which further supports the actual conclusion of science that whales are in fact highly derived artiodactyls, that is, even-toed ungulates.
They claim that fossils show a clear evolutionary progression from land mammals to whales.
Well, yeah, but only because they do.
But many of these fossils are incomplete.
Welcome to paleontology. You must be new here.
Take the famous fossil Pachycetus. Scientists first found an incomplete skull, and it didn't even have a body. Later, a more complete Pachycetus discovery revealed perfectly normal legs. Pachycetus lived on land.
Yeah, you know, the kind of thing you'd expect for the first member of a group that started on land and then moved to the water. What am I missing here? This is exactly what evolution would predict. And then, lo and behold, there it is, a terrestrial ancestor of whales. It would be weird if such a thing hadn't existed. How could whales evolve from terrestrial mammals without having a terrestrial ancestor?
Or Rhodocetus. At first, with only one head, spine, and a few other bones, secular scientists imagine it had front flippers and a whale tail. But just like Pachycetus, later discoveries revealed that it was just a land-dwelling mammal.
No, it's definitely semi-aquatic with enlarged feet for swimming, and a nose higher on the face for easier breathing to take in breath. And ICR even cops to this by putting it on the beach. Once again, having an animal that's semi-aquatic in a lineage from terrestrial animals to marine animals is what you'd expect. I love that ICR is just painting a perfect picture of the transition of whales from land to sea, but saying, nuh-uh, some early reconstructions weren't quite right, so this perfect transitional series doesn't count. Also, remember how in the last topic they said there were no transitional species and now we're just being shown them by ICR? Talk about irony.
Sadly, some museum illustrations still show whale tails on Rhodocetus.
Oh no, some museum displays aren't up to the minute with new scientific findings. In other news, tornadoes are dangerous. More at 11.
Without Pachycetus or Rhodocetus, the main missing links vanish from whale evolution.
Good thing they still exist and are still transitional then, as we've been shown by ICR themselves. Do you think ICR knows that showing the evidence that they're wrong, but talking about it with an incredulous tone doesn't make that evidence go away?
So, we have whale kinds or land mammals, but nothing in between.
Yeah, except for Ambulocetus and Rhodocetus. Whoops.
Secular scientists often point to vestigial features as evidence for evolution. They assumed that certain whale hip bones were useless legs left over from land mammals evolving into whales.
No, not useless, just no longer doing the thing that defines a leg functionally. That is, a limb used to support and propel a creature across a solid substrate, especially on land. They can have lots of secondary functions besides that, and they're still vestigial as a leg. Because they can't leg no more.
Come to find out, those bones play a pivotal role in helping whales reproduce. They aren't useless at all.
No, they're not, but being useless isn't a requirement for them to be vestigial.
The most complete scientific evidence refutes Darwin's hunch.
The hunch he never really had.
Instead of transitional fossils and useless features, we find fully formed creatures according to their created kinds.
Weird how the majority of this so-called fact was literally just showing the evidence for whale evolution. Well, next up is our fourth topic of the day and 35th topic overall, the seeing eye.
Great photographers make taking a picture look easy. They pair a select lens to a sophisticated camera and adjust shutter speed and aperture size to capture the perfect photo. Our eyes perform similar tasks, but we're precisely engineered better than any camera.
I'm going to need a citation for the human eye being engineered. You don't get to just assume your conclusion to argue for it. That's literally just begging the question.
And their components are vastly more sophisticated.
Well, that's going to depend on the camera. Many commercially available cameras have higher resolution and better dynamic range than the human eye. Most are better at focusing than just about anyone who needs glasses, and at the high end, there's no way you can tell me that the James Webb Space Telescope isn't a more sophisticated imaging device than a human eye.
The cornea is responsible for approximately 70% of light focus. It bends light in precise ways to enter your pupil, just like a camera lens. The iris widens or shrinks to adjust to different environments. In dark environments, it widens to let in more light. In bright environments, it shrinks to protect your eyes from overexposure.
Do you think creationists know that just describing how the eye works isn't an argument as to how the eye came to be? It's not like scientists are unaware of how the eye works and for that reason accept evolutionary biology.
The lens focuses light onto the retina, which captures and converts light waves into nerve impulses and sends them through the optic nerve to the brain. Of course, the ability to see is so complicated that we need more than just an eyeball. We also need muscles.
Nope. The eye doesn't need muscles attached for it to see. Birds use their whole heads for gaze stabilization, and many arthropods don't even bother with physical gaze stabilization in the first place. Muscles attached to the eye are optional, although they sure are handy if you're a mammal.
Ocular muscles rotate eyes inside the skull in perfect sync with the demands of vision. One muscle uses a small ligament as a pulley to rotate the eye toward the nose. A ring of tiny muscles adjusts the lens shape so we can quickly focus from far to near and back to far.
Well, if you've got cool thing therefore God on your bingo card, I think you can check it off.
When the brain receives nerve impulses, it translates them into images. The images actually come in upside down, but thankfully, the brain flips them around. God's marvelous engineering makes it possible for us to see the details of his creation.
I feel like they're not actually going to make any argument as to why this couldn't evolve. Like, am I just wasting my time with this one?
The eye, specialized nerves, and unique muscles all operate in perfect harmony, better than any camera.
This narrator sounds American, and around 40% of Americans need corrective lenses of some kind. That means that really eyes on average are worse than just about any consumer-grade optics you're likely to get your hand on. So if having good eyes that beat out cameras were a good argument for the idea that it required a god to design eyes aren't good enough to make that argument in the first place. So the argument isn't valid, and even if it were, it would remain unsound.
Could it have been made by time and chance?
On their own, no, but add in selection, and yes.
No way! Just as cameras have a designer, the seeing eye is an ingenious design made by an all-powerful creator.
We know cameras are designed because we see people designing them, we have historical records of people designing them, and most importantly, cameras don't get together to have sex and make little baby cameras that can vary from their parents, so that better cameras can then be selected for. If cameras did do that, then it wouldn't be clear at all that they were designed. And hey, you know what? It is what some cameras do, namely, biological organisms with eyes. Which is why scientists don't simply look at eyes and say, yep, must be magic, and instead actually look into things like the evolution of opsins, the development of trichromatic vision from primitive mammalian dichromacy, look at which Hox genes control development of eyes across Y taxa, etc. And it turns out there's a whole bunch of evidence that eyes evolved.
The hearing ear and the seeing eye, the Lord has made them both. Proverbs 20:12.
Cool, but as always, the Bible is making a claim. At least in science, it's not evidence on its own. Well, next up is Chinese pictographs, which is our 5th topic of the day, and our 36th overall.
Many written languages are alphabet-based, but Chinese word characters are made of picture symbols called pictographs. But where did these Chinese picture words come from?
Originally, they were obviously depicting the thing they represented. So if you wanted to write horse, you'd draw a simple horse. The characters simplified, becoming less obviously pictorial over time. Then later some of them were used for similar sounding words along with another pictograph to tell you which version of the similar sounding words you had. So the word for mother and the word for horse in Mandarin are very similar, only differing in tone. So if you want to write mother, you use the horse pictogram, but include a symbol for human, meaning it's the word that sounds like horse, but it's a human, namely mother.
The clues are in some of the pictographs themselves. If you look at the combination of symbols for the pictograph word to create, you'll see symbols for walk, talk, living, dust, and man.
Nearly everything about this is wrong. The radical does indeed mean walk. The rest is phonetic, not ideographic content. Near as I can find, the phonetic component doesn't mean walk. The things ICR is identifying as living and dust are actually just one simplified character, not two combined characters, and together they mean living on their own, but again are here just used phonetically, and the strokes they identify as man actually mean mouth. The mouth part is also just part of the phonetic component of the sign. Now granted, I'm no expert at Chinese, so feel free to double check me, but at least you know, I bothered to look up lists of Chinese radicals and phonetic symbols, rather than just pulling shit out my ass and smearing it on the screen as if it were actual research.
Reminders of Genesis.
Hey, fun fact, making up things so that they sound like Genesis and then marveling that the thing you made up does what you wanted it to do is not impressive. It's just dishonest. It's like Sanford marveling that the program he made specifically to pretend genetic entropy works showed that genetic entropy works. This is what you might call a nothing burger.
God used his mouth to create by breathing life into Adam's body, made from dust.
Well, at least mouth is in there, but dust isn't. And again, both the mouth part and the living part are not in there as ideographic elements. They're not telling you a story. It's literally like the eyeball in the symbols I heart you, meaning I love you. The symbol for the eye there has nothing to do with the actual organ. It's just there for the sound. Chinese symbols aren't little mini stories for your mystical imaginings. The script is a functional one that, like virtually all scripts, directly encodes phonetic information in most characters.
Adam and Eve looked fully mature, able to walk and talk right from the start.
Okay, but again, that symbol for talk isn't in there for some semantic reason. It's just there for sound-alike reasons, just like the eyeball from before. Further, how is it that these modern characters are so biblical when we don't have any significant cultural parallels to the stories of the Bible in China outside of the never large Jewish and Christian communities? Especially since Christians were expelled in China, and the Jewish community was always tiny and is now completely gone, having assimilated with Muslim populations. Why are there no stories like that of Adam and Eve or the Garden of Eden with a snake in Chinese myth? What, were Chinese characters made with secret Christian messages by Christians? That seems unlikely. The first Christians in China were members of what today is called the Church of the East, not to be confused with the Eastern Orthodox Church, and by the time they got to China, Chinese characters were already well developed. Was it the Jews who were secretly creating Chinese characters? Also unlikely, given that Chinese characters predate the writing of any of the Bible, so there's no native myths like this, and the only real options for introducing these secret Bible readings are unlikely in the extreme, plus we have a perfectly reasonable explanation for these characters that just doesn't result in these suspiciously convenient biblical readings. So the most reasonable thing to conclude is that this has nothing to do with the Bible.
One Chinese word for garden also includes images from Genesis. The early Chinese combined the ideas of two persons who received the breath of life after the first one, Adam, was made from the dust of the earth.
Again, this is a radical meaning fence, which is the outside rectangle, followed by a phonetic component that carries no semantic meaning. I'm not entertaining the rest of this one. It's just the same one with create, and then they do the same thing with flood. Making up nonsense about Chinese characters doesn't provide evidence for anything except the imagination and loose relationship with honesty of creationists. Our sixth topic of the day is echolocation, which will also be our 37th overall.
Did you know that humans hear a wide range of frequencies?
Yes.
We can hear as low as 20 hertz, which is lower than the lowest piano note, and we can hear as high as 20 kilohertz, which is higher than the highest note on a piccolo. Even though this is a wide range, some animals detect sounds at an even higher pitch.
I gotta say, now that I'm doing my 37th of these little topics, these intro bits just contain so little value. After I finish this script, I'm going to have to read some real scientific papers as a palate cleanser or something.
Dolphins and bats send and receive messages in ultrasonic frequencies, and they interpret these sounds with split-second precision. All mammals have a cochlea to amplify, detect, and convert sound waves into an electrochemical impulse.
Weird how the ear setup is taxonomically restricted when there's no reason for it to be under a paradigm of special creation by an intelligent agent, but there is under the regime of common descent. It's almost like there's no evidence for special creation, and there is evidence for common ancestry.
But dolphins and bats have special cochlea that detect ultrasonic frequencies. While bats live in the air and dolphins live in the water, both animals use a biological form of sonar technology called echolocation to see with sound. So a dolphin uses reflected sound waves to calculate an object's size, shape, distance, and direction of motion to find food even in murky water. And when multiple dolphins are approaching the same food source, burst pulse sounds ensure that the dominant dolphin gets the right-of-way and captures its food without a collision.
Yep, dolphins are cool. One interesting thing, though, is that while dolphins and bats both use an identical Preston protein for echolocation, when you sequence the DNA to make such a protein, the sequences are about as different as it is physically possible to get while still providing the same protein. That's the kind of thing you'd expect if they both evolved separately, but not what you'd expect if an intelligent designer was copy-pasting his Preston design into different lineages. Yet again, special creation has no evidence and common descent does.
Bats use echolocation too, but the creator tuned their equipment to work in air instead of water.
Hey, here's a tip for creationists. Just saying that something that is perfectly accounted for by natural or sexual selection was done by God isn't an argument or convincing in any way. You actually have to make an argument as to why selection doesn't work. And it's not like selection doesn't have limitations. So you have a starting point. Look into local fitness optima on a fitness landscape. There you go. I help the creationists. Not much, of course, and it's not like they'll take the hint and get better arguments, but oh well.
They send out a pulse at 100 kilohertz that, within just a fraction of a second, can drop down to 30 kilohertz. A muscle in their middle ear contracts as the impulse is sent out, but relaxes to receive the echoes of the impulse, preventing the bats from deafening themselves.
That bit is actually only true of laryngeally echolocating bats. Some bats make their pulses in the mouth instead, and they do not need or have this muscle that protects the middle ear. And this is because echolocation evolved more than once in bats, so bats echolocate in fundamentally different ways. Why would a creator give different kinds of bats different echolocation, but in a way that still sits within a twin-nested hierarchy of morphology and genetics for bats, just as if evolution were true? I guess maybe to trick us. God must just be Loki.
Kneel before me. I said...
The specifications in dolphin and bat biosonar systems are so many, so well integrated, and so precise. Could they really have developed at random in two completely different environments?
At random, no, but add in some natural selection, and yes. There has been no argument put forward as to why they could not. Simply pointing out that something is cool isn't an argument that it couldn't evolve.
It stands to reason that God uniquely outfitted both of them with everything they need to thrive.
If that stood to reason, you'd think we could be given a reason to think it's true, instead of, no actual argument. Oh well, it's time for our 7th topic of the day, and 38th overall, which is versatile hands.
Perhaps no tool in the world is as versatile and useful as the human hand. Its details constantly display real design. For example, finger bone lengths follow the proportions of the Fibonacci number sequence. The sum of the smallest two segments of a finger equals the length of the third, and the sum of the second and third equals the length of the fourth bone.
So embryology works on the basis of hormone gradients, which fall off according to mathematical rules. This means that organisms will inevitably have mathematical relationships between body parts involving ratios that are found in other parts of nature, because those other organisms also use the same basic method of development. The Fibonacci sequence is one of these because it's good at space filling. Another is Voronoi noise, which can be seen in the patterns of spots and stripes of basically any animals with them. The fact that chemical gradients exist, which is all this really comes down to, is hardly evidence on its own of special creation or intelligent design. But also, this is almost certainly cherry-picked. If some other ratio held, I'm sure creationists would find some kind of cosmic significance to that too. It's not like they didn't think special creation was true until they measured metacarpals and phalanges, and then suddenly the light of God shone round about them and they were so afraid.
Your hand is a mobile golden spiral, perfectly balancing strength and dexterity.
The fact that you can get someone to curl their fingers to kind of vaguely resemble a golden spiral doesn't make the human hand a golden spiral, nor does having bone length ratios that are roughly that of the Fibonacci sequence. And this is just bullshit they made up because it sounds cool.
Also, extended fingers squeezed against one another show the offset knuckles meshing. If knuckles lined up, they'd rub uncomfortably and space fingers too far apart.
Too far apart for what? And how do we know it would be uncomfortable? I'm pretty sure you'd get used to it before you were even able to form memories, so no one would ever notice if your knuckles all grew to reach the same distance from your wrist. Also, one of the things that you might notice is that in many animals, the middle finger, or digit 3, is the longest on the manus. This is because of how digit development works. The first digit to start forming is digit 3 in all but some dinosaurs. And so it is also the one that tends to grow the longest. Only some animals that have highly derived front feet, like ungulates or ceratopsians, break from this mold. Or some dinosaurs who, as discussed, have a frame shift, meaning that they start developing with digit 2. In this aspect of hand anatomy, human hands are actually extremely unremarkable and are just kind of stock standard mammal hands. That's not true about every aspect of them. They're highly derived in other ways, such as the pointing and flexibility of the thumbs or digit 1, or the fact that they have nails rather than claws sprouting from the distal phalange.
Muscles that control the hand actually reside in the forearm instead of the palm, leaving space to hold an object or another person's hand.
Yeah, okay. What is the takeaway supposed to be for this? This is just how limbs work in, all tetrapods.
A large amount of your brain is dedicated to controlling hand muscles. This means that grip control combinations are nearly infinite and remarkably versatile.
This just in. Animal that uses its hands as manipulators as its primary survival strategy dedicates a lot of brain power to using its hands. This is extremely unsurprising under evolution. In fact, it would be bizarre if humans were as dependent as they are on their hands, but only dedicated a minuscule proportion of their brain power to controlling their hands. Of course, a lot of brain power is also dedicated to sensations coming from the lips, penis, and clitoris, but maybe that's not safe enough for creationist virgin ears to handle.
For example, a construction worker can easily curl 3 fingers around a bucket handle in a loose endurance grip. At the same time, his thumb can press a note card tight to his index finger, while his pinky hooks a plastic sack. Simultaneously, his other hand can curl its last 3 fingers and press the palm firm over the fingertips, locked in a power grip to carry a heavy hammer, while the thumb and index finger gently pluck up a potato chip without crushing it. And how do people type so fast? The brain plans finger movements 3 actions ahead of time. Intervals between keystrokes are often as brief as 60,000ths of a second.
Okay, so the theme today seems to just be biology is cool, so God did it. But the thing is, it's not like these facts are in dispute in science. It's not like scientists have never noticed their hands before. The last few of these are just look at the trees arguments, but instead of trees, it's just eyes, bats, dolphins, and hands. Saying, look at the blank, isn't a convincing argument unless you already believe God's the only way to explain a neat thing. It might keep people from looking into science who are already disinclined to trust science, but for most people, it's just not something that even rises to the level of an argument that can be considered. It means nothing. In fact, that's a big part of why I've left so much of these just play without comment. There's not really anything to say because there's no argument being made, and it's not like human hands aren't dexterous and reasonably strong. Well, it's time for our 8th topic of the day and 39th overall, Louis Pasteur, which hopefully will be more than just a list of things that are cool followed by no argument.
Is evolution a requirement for innovation?
Not unless the innovation itself requires evolution to be true, which most probably don't. So in general, no.
In the 19th century, the theory of abiogenesis was widely accepted, much like evolution is today.
No, it wasn't. Most people accepted special creation and spontaneous generation, which are both the supernatural creation of life, with some kind of vital energy unique to life which energize otherwise non-living matter into life, like what God did when he had the waters of the earth bring forth living creatures, or what people believed happened with things like rotting meat spontaneously transforming into maggots. Abiogenesis, being the creation of simple chemical systems with the basic properties of life via chemical processes, was not at all widely believed in at the time, nor is it the same as special creation or spontaneous generation. I now get the feeling that this whole thing is just going to be one big conflation of spontaneous generation with abiogenesis. Creation Challenge 3, don't strawman science. Challenge level, impossible.
Charles Darwin strongly promoted this idea that life was generated by non-life.
Sort of. His writing certainly held open the possibility that life may have formed in the remote past through natural means, but he also wrote a lot about the possibility of a creator. He knew he didn't have enough to say much about the first life, so he didn't.
However, Louis Pasteur, a French microbiologist and believer in biblical creation, made a startling discovery.
You ever notice how every time they point out that some scientists believed in the Bible, they never actually describe that scientist using the text of the Bible to make predictions about science to gather evidence for their ideas? They always just do regular old science the way modern creationists, as a rule, refuse to do. And further, Pasteur wasn't trying to deny the naturalistic origin of life. He was explicitly debunking a supernaturalist idea of spontaneous generation, which again isn't the same thing as abiogenesis.
In the early 1860s, he conducted experiments comparing organic material that was directly exposed to air to organic material that was not directly exposed to air. And the result? Nothing grew in the vessels that were not directly exposed to air and airborne microbes.
Yep, thereby going a long way to disprove the idea of vitalism, which is still rejected to this day by scientists, even the ones in origin of life research.
This confirmed biogenesis, meaning life always comes from life.
Well, it rejected the hypothesis of vitalistic spontaneous generation. It did not reject the hypothesis of abiogenesis, which it did not even test.
Pasteur declared, "Never will the doctrine of spontaneous generation recover from the mortal blow struck by this simple experiment."
And so far, he's right about that. Spontaneous generation has no place in science to this day. And that includes animals being brought forth from the ground or the waters via the vitalistic energy of the breath of God, which is just spontaneous generation. This is really not the wind creationists pretended to be.
His studies led to the practices of sterilization and pasteurization, particularly in the areas of medicine and food preparation. Along with German physician Robert Koch, he shares the title of the father of germ theory and bacteriology.
Yep, Louis Pasteur was really important for getting the supernaturalism out of biology. Not sure why that's an argument in favor of an explicitly supernatural idea about the origin of life, but oh well.
having conducted experiments supporting the theory that germs cause disease. Pasteur went on to research the rabies virus, developing a non-virulent vaccine that in 1885 saved a 9-year-old boy who had been bitten by a rabid dog.
Weird how he didn't just pray harder.
And when anthrax was destroying entire flocks of sheep in France, Pasteur successfully vaccinated them against the disease.
Man, that anthrax shot sucks. It's great if you're going to be exposed to anthrax, but jeez is it rough. It made my left arm limp for days and hurt something fierce.
Must a person believe in evolution to be an innovating scientist?
No, but also one does not need to believe in the theory of gravity to be an innovating astronomer, as evidenced by the proposal of heliocentrism before the universal law of gravitation was discovered. This doesn't make gravity less true, nor is it a good reason to just discard it, because some things can be invented or discovered without it.
Louis Pasteur's life clearly showed the answer is no. With a known belief in biblical creation, Pasteur was an innovator whose work set the foundation for some of the most important advances in our modern world.
Funny how we weren't actually shown how such a belief was important to those discoveries, or how acceptance of evolution would have prevented them. Our antepenultimate, 9th of the day, and 40th topic overall is the secret code.
Can evolution explain math?
What? No, evolution is about change in biological populations. It can be explained with math, but it doesn't explain math. That's dumb.
The Mandelbrot set of numbers reveals a secret code that went undiscovered for thousands of years.
I mean, lots of things went undiscovered for thousands of years. Anything that is discovered now went undiscovered for thousands of years. That's just a weird way to say some things are currently not known, which isn't really news to anyone. I was really hoping this was going to be about the Bible code, but I think it will somehow be even dumber than that.
While mathematicians can plot this set by hand, today's computers show with great precision that beauty is built into numbers.
I mean, that's a subjective thing, but also the beautiful Mandelbrot visualizations everyone is used to, and that are being showed here, are carefully designed. You see, the set itself is just the black parts. Everything that's not black is just not part of the set. The wonderful colors are chosen by humans for aesthetic reasons, and are usually keyed to things like the speed at which the complex number under consideration reaches infinity under the Mandelbrot rule, where, given that f of z equals z squared plus c, and the values for c that approach a finite number are in the set, and those that do not are outside the set, where c is a number on the complex number plane, the set is calculated for all values of c, or at least as many as your computer can handle. But notice that at the base this just gives you a yes/no answer, black or white. While some of the swirls and whatnot of the plain old Mandelbrot set may be cool, it takes a lot more than just plotting the set to come up with beautiful visualization. It actually takes actual artistic talent, and as a result, much of the beauty in these visualizations is like the beauty in a painting. It was designed to be beautiful to humans by humans.
And when you take a closer look at the Mandelbrot set, you see the pattern goes on without end.
Yeah, the complex number plane is a non-countable infinity, so many functions that can be performed on it will be similarly infinitely complex. As a side note, in some ways the Mandelbrot set is actually rather boring in terms of fractals. For example, it is exactly two-dimensional, which is kind of lame considering that many fractals have non-whole number dimensionality, like the Sierpinski triangle, which is approximately 1.5850 dimensions, or the fractal pyramid, which is about 2.3219 dimensions. It's not really time to get into non-whole number dimensionality, but just know that it has to do with scaling factors for fractals, which often do not match the scaling factors for shapes that are not fractal and are plotted in a whole number of dimensions. But yes, all fractals are plotted within a whole number of dimensional spaces, so it's a bit weird. Anyway, that's enough math nerdery for now. I'm just delaying having to hear from ICR, but that's inevitable, so I might as well get going with it.
This is an example of a fractal, a type of structure that repeats infinitely on smaller and smaller scales.
That's one definition of a fractal, but not all fractals are self-similar. Self-similar shapes can be fractal if the repetition is infinite, but non-self-similar mathematical objects with non-whole number dimensionality are also fractals. This also comes up in the coastline problem, in which it's basically impossible to get a real measure of a country's coastline because the smaller a ruler you use, the longer the coastline gets. And it turns out the coastlines are neither self-similar, but also neither are they one-dimensional. They have fractional dimension, and so are fractals, at least as far as humans can treat them practically.
Snowflakes have a fractal quality. Why is this?
Kind of. Their self-similarity is finite, so they approximate fractals, but even at human levels of measurement, this fractal quality falls apart.
The laws of nature responsible for snowflake formation are mathematical because they stem from the mind of God.
Maybe, but in order for this to be necessary, one would have to argue that only an intelligent agent can be responsible for a universe that has consistent behavior in terms of physical reality. I don't think that ICR has even tried to do that. And if you're into mathematical realism, then math is the basis of physical reality, and all self-contained forms of math describe some universe. not just the one that describes ours, in which case we simply are in one of the infinite expressions of mathematical reality in which observers are possible. Now, I'm not really taken in by mathematical realism, but at least it shows that there are other hypothetical possibilities besides God when it comes to explaining why the universe follows consistent laws that can be described mathematically. Maybe God is a better explanation. I'm not a philosopher or a theologian. I just know that it's not something that can be baldly asserted as if there were no other possibility.
Fractals occur both in math, which is abstract, not made of atoms, and the physical world, which is made of atoms.
Kind of. Even coastlines actually have a limit to their fractal quality, because eventually you get down to like the atomic level, and below this size starts to not really mean much. So there's a physical limit to how small a ruler you can meaningfully use to measure something like this. Now, it's not practical to use such a ruler, so for practical purposes, coastlines are fractals. But in physical reality, it's not clear that any fractals actually exist, such that you could go look at one or hold it in your hand.
Because they have the same designer.
Math is a human invention that was first used to describe the world in which humans find themselves, and it was really worked out based on seeing what worked. Then later, the ancient Greeks came up with the idea of basing it on axioms, and then deriving provable logical statements from them, and they did so with axioms that accommodated the evidence-based math. But the thing is that there are other systems of math that do not well correlate to the physical world that also have been invented by humans. If math was designed by God, it is only in the way that you could say the device you're watching this was, in that both were approximately designed by humans, and at best you could say that the universe in which they must both operate may have been designed by God. But no argument in favor of that has thus far been put forth by ICR in this series.
Lightning branches occur in a fractal pattern, and so does broccoli.
Well, they both approximate fractals, but in the case of the broccoli, that's only broccoli specifically designed by humans to do that. Wild mustard plants don't do that, nor do most breeds of broccoli.
If the universe was formed by chance, why would nature follow mathematical rules?
Why wouldn't it? We have no data on the formation of other universes, whether by chance or not, to see what would happen. Perhaps mathematical realism is in fact true. Perhaps God is real. Perhaps there's an infinite multiverse, and only universes with consistent rules can support observers such that they can wonder about consistent rules of the universe. I don't know which, if any of these are right, but the fact is that there are more options than we're being presented with here, and no attempt is being made to show why the one preferred by ICR is the correct one.
After all, the number 7 couldn't have evolved from the number 3.
Yeah, because evolution is a thing about biological populations, not mathematical abstractions, like the natural numbers.
Try that argument on your banker sometime.
What? The argument that in fact numbers are populations of biological organisms, and so, the bank should do what exactly? Who knows? Just go with it, I guess. Gibbs money, please. That reminds me, did you know that you can gain exclusive perks by supporting the channel by either joining as a member here on YouTube with the join button below this video, or on Patreon, which is linked in the description? Either way, you can get early access to content like this, you can join my exclusive Discord server just for people supporting the channel, and at higher tiers, there are even more perks. This channel stays afloat because of the generous support of viewers like you. Okay, now back to the regular scheduled programming.
7 has always been 7, and 3 has always been 3. So when it comes to math, everyone borrows from creation.
Just saying a thing doesn't make it so. Okay, well, that was dumb. Our penultimate, 10th overall, and 41st topic is man's best friend. Bring on the doggos.
As the old saying goes, dogs are man's best friend. Dogs perform many useful tasks, from hunting to security to helping people with disabilities. Most of us would agree, we're just glad they're part of the family.
You know, I don't agree with ICR on much, but here, yes, I can agree. Dogs are pretty great. At least when they're not being abused by cops into helping ruin the lives of innocent people, but that's not really their choice. Remember, don't call a cop, call a cab.
Dogs belong to the genus Canis. The Bible doesn't use the word species.
You sure about that? Let's read Genesis 21 through 25.
Creatique Deus cete grandia, et omnem animam viventum adque motibellem, quam produxerant aquae in specias suas, et omne volitile secundum genesu suum. Et vidit Deus quod esset bonum, benedixitque es decens. Crescite et multiplicamini et replete aquas maris. Auesque multiplicentur super terram, et factum est vespere, et mane dies quintus. Dixit quoque Deus, produca terra animam viventum in genere suo, jumenta et reptilia et bestias terrae secundum, species suas. Factumque est ita, et feci Deus bestias terrae juxta specia suas et jumenta, et omne reptilia terre in genere suo, et vidit Deus quod esset bonum.
Whoops, turns out that yeah, the Bible does use the word species, at least in as much as it uses the word kind. You just have to read it in Latin. You know, the language the word species comes from.
But tells us that God created animals according to their kind.
Yeah, turns out that the Hebrew word mean that is translated into kind in English is translated into Latin as specius. You know, species. So if you want to say that the word kind is in there because it's in some translations, you can't really say that species isn't, because that's also in some translations. Uh-oh.
Meaning a type of created category of creature.
Yeah, sure, but how big those are supposed to be is never well defined in the text of the Bible. But traditionally, it was thought to be around the species level, and it's only in the late 20th century that creationists realized just how insane that was on multiple levels. So they accepted macroevolution, but only so far as they could keep pretending special creation worked, even though they were making that creation less and less special, and more general. Creationism has been in retreat since the beginning. They accept as much evolution as they have to, and deny as much as they cannot accept. But where that line is keeps being pushed back as it becomes so obvious that even the laity in the pews would start to notice their claims were ridiculous. I mean, all of them are still ridiculous, just less obviously so to those who don't spend their time doing what I do, or actual experts in the field.
Dogs are part of the canine kind.
Okay, so in this case, kind is supposed to be a subfamily. What about the other canid subfamilies, the Borophagians and the Hesperocyanins? Are they separate kinds? Why? How do we know? No one has answers to this.
But how did we get so many of these lovable dog breeds?
Evolution by artificial selection.
All species change only within their kinds.
Given that we have never been given a way to know with high confidence if any two organisms are in a kind or not, that statement carries no semantic content. It makes just as much sense as saying no piano can be baked to purple banana. If I go way more than halfway to meet the creationists, I could say that this means that nothing can evolve so that it no longer has the same ancestry as its ancestors. But that's just obviously true, and not something that evolution would contest. In fact, that's vital to the whole idea of common ancestry.
For example, scientists have observed that stickleback fish can switch from living in saltwater to freshwater between generations, but they all still remain stickleback fish.
As required by evolution, yes. If they didn't, that would be a fundamental violation of the theory of evolution, so perhaps creationists should hope to see such a thing, although I suppose it also wouldn't support their ideas either, so perhaps not.
Darwin used variations in finch beaks to illustrate how all creatures might have developed from a common ancestor over time. But despite these small changes, the finches are still finches.
Yep, that's not how monophily works. Humans evolved from vertebrates, and so they're vertebrates. They evolved from mammals, and so they're mammals. They evolved from apes, and so they're apes. Similarly, birds evolved from dinosaurs, and so they're dinosaurs. Evolution can make new groups, but it can't erase old groupings short of extinction. The tanagers of the Galapagos Islands will always be tanagers, as will all of their descendants.
Different species of iguanas are uniquely adapted to land and marine environments, yet they can still interbreed, showing they come from the same kind.
Oh, so if two things can't interbreed, they're not the same kind then. Well, there are no verified reports of members of genus Canis producing offspring with members of genus Vulpes, Lycaon, or Chrysocyon, so maybe interfertility is a good way to say that two organisms are in the same kind, but lack thereof can't be used to say that they are in different kinds. And that's the important thing. By this definition, humans and mushrooms might be in the same kind. We can't tell, because we can only ever give yes answers, but not no answers with this criterion, to the question of, are these two organisms in the same kind? When your only possible answers are yes or maybe, you have an unfalsifiable claim. And you know what use science has for unfalsifiable claims? None. You're not doing science at that point. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay at the science bar.
Domestic dogs, wolves, foxes, and coyotes are all part of the canine kind.
Okay, more confirmation that this is unfalsifiable, since there are no confirmed Vulpes Canis hybrids, although there have been a few reported, but that's also true for Bigfoot. Si no tienes cuerpo, no creo. Get a body or GTFO when it comes to cryptids, including fox dogs.
Within the canine kind, differences like size and coat color show tremendous variation, not evolutionary change.
Evolutionary change happens anytime the allele frequency in a population changes over generations. Since that's required for dog breeding, this is indeed evolutionary change. You don't just get to redefine evolution because you want to pretend you don't believe in it, even though you very much do. Creationists believe in evolution, just, with arbitrary cutoff points so that their creation remains special.
Because dogs have 78 chromosomes, 30 more than chimpanzees, they can produce variety more quickly than other kinds.
Wait, what? How does that follow? This variety is produced by mutation, which is not dependent on chromosome count. What is happening here? Similar differences in domesticated cats have been created, but they only have 38 chromosomes. What even is this argument? Well, who knows, they're not going to explain it, so I'm moving on to Flying Machine, our 11th and final topic of the day, and our 42nd overall.
As we fly to see family over the holidays or to take a relaxing vacation, we often fail to remember the marvel of the airplane. In 1485, Leonardo da Vinci first dreamed up a flying machine, which he called an ornithopter.
Obligatory Dune reference. Let me guess. We're going with birds flew before humans did, therefore God had to design birds because humans had to design planes.
Non sequitur. Your facts are uncoordinated.
His theory featured a rod and pulley system that the pilot would use to make the wings flap. It wasn't until 1903 that the famous brothers Orville and Wilbur Wright designed and successfully flew the first heavier-than-air aircraft. Their inspiration actually came from studying the mechanics of pigeon wings in flight.
Yeah, if you want to design a thing that does a particular task, looking at things that already do that task successfully is a pretty good way to start.
The invention of airplanes is an awesome example of biomimicry, humans copying God's design.
Ah yes, assuming your conclusion to argue for your conclusion. That's what we call begging the question.
Researchers have studied how bees land in order to design better landings for aircraft, and scientists have analyzed scales of the African polypterus fish in an effort to design lighter and stronger body armor.
All of which is cool, but until a reason is given why a cool thing can't evolve, and if it can't evolve it must be God, this isn't an argument.
Gecko eyes are about 350 times more sensitive than human eyes, and can see color in the dark.
Remember before how we were told that the amazing perfection of the human eye could only be explained by God? But now we're being told that the dumpster of garbage that is the human eye compared to the gecko eye is also proof of God. So are human eyes perfect or what? Pick a lane, ICR.
These incredible visual processors may offer clues to improving night vision camera technology. Bionic hands have been studied by engineers as a way to duplicate the human hand. But while much progress has been made, machines still aren't as good as hands built by the ultimate architect.
Architects make buildings, not tools. The word they want there is engineer. But then again, that's still begging the question.
Ironically, when inventions are copied from nature, designers often credit their inspiration to processes that just happened over millions of years.
That's not what irony is. That's just engineers crediting the evident source of biological variation. A source which at this point isn't even attempting to discredit, except by tone. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not policing ICR's tone. They can use whatever tone they want. It's just that behind that, there needs to be something substantive.
They fail to recognize God's amazing design and creation.
That's because it's not evidently there to be recognized. Nothing about organisms seems obviously designed in a way that precludes evolution, at least not that has been put forth by creationists. The best they've really done is irreducible complexity, but as it turns out, no, that doesn't work and has been falsified over and over again. Well, that's it for today. Next time, we'll start out with our 43rd topic overall, bizarrely named Turkey Coma, which I'm hoping is either about the birds coming over and pecking everyone's head hard enough that it knocks them all out, or it will be about the entire country of Turkey mysteriously falling into an inexplicable coma as a prelude to a zombie apocalypse. But I suspect that it will actually be about why you get sleepy after eating a lot. If you enjoyed the video, hit like and tell me in the comments. If you didn't, feel free to hit dislike and tell me what the problem was in the comments. Either way, please remember to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you're always notified when I have more content. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Bob Knob, Benthoven, Tapioca Weasel, Denny5252, Elleron Teller, Phil Rivara, Ian Chen, Kelvin Brostic Van Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabdy Babby, Monkey They Them, San, Sphincter of Doom, and the Venerable Bede. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.